Alright everybody, we are in scenic Mott's Run Reservoir in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and we are about to do Pytheas's maiden trip into actual natural water. Yep, you heard right, folks. After working on this project for 5 weeks, I was finally able to take the Pytheas platform out for its maiden expedition. I'll be up front and say things did not go 100% smoothly, but I ended up learning a few things, and, most importantly, I had a lot of fun doing it. So before we dive into the good stuff, a little bit about Mott's Run. It's a 160-acre artificial reservoir that provides water for the town of Fredericksburg, Virginia. I struggled a lot to find a depth map or any other type of official source for how deep the lake is, but anecdotally, I came across fishermen online who claimed it could get around 30 to 40 feet deep. So I rented a boat and proceeded to the eastern half of the lake, which I believed to be the deepest area. And upon arriving, I discovered what would be the first mishap of the day. I do know at least in the area where I'm at right now, the anchor they provided me, the line is not long enough to hit the bottom. So I'm free floating right now. But that's our situation. This is going to be where I take my first readings and hopefully my first pictures. That's right. I decided to deploy the sensor pod anyway, despite not being able to properly anchor the boat. Needless to say, this came back to bite me pretty quickly. But for now, let's watch as Pytheas takes its first dive into a real body of water. I didn't notice it until later in the trip, but apparently the clock on the Pi had reset while it was powered down. As a result, the time you see reported in the video, as well as the times in the first logs, are inaccurate. In reality, the time during this video was closer to about 20 past noon, not almost 7 in the evening. Other than that, the system seemed to be performing exactly as I had hoped. The sensors were reporting good values. I was getting clear, although dark, images. I was actually really surprised at how quickly the water darkened. By the time I had settled on the bottom, it was mostly pitch black, save for the occasional ghostly, unidentified anomaly drifting by the camera. You may be asking at this point why I didn't try turning on the onboard lamp to see if I could get a better view. Well, the short answer is I was a bit distracted topside and couldn't operate the controls. Remember how I decided to deploy without an anchor? Alright, problem one, we have snagged the tether on my motor. Fun stuff. Yeah, I began to drift away from my drop point and it caused some complications. Okay, so that was less than 15 minutes. I had to pull it out of the water without a proper anchor to keep us in one location. The boat kept kind of drifting and it became a problem. You can see we're almost like to the shore at this point. So I'm going to try a shallower area where our anchor will actually work, and then we will try again. Before we head off to that second location, let's go over what we learned from the initial deep water site. I don't mean just the obvious procedural lessons like always drop anchor before trying this, or watch where your tether is going. I mean what we learned from the actual data itself. Even though the pod wasn't underwater as long as I had hoped, the sensors still mostly worked, and I was able to record some information from the site. For starters, it looks like those anecdotes were right. At least in the area I was in, it looks like the depth was around 9.5 meters, or about 31.3 feet. One of the more unexpected things I learned was how quickly the water temperature drops with depth. Don't get me wrong, I knew the water would get colder. I just didn't realize it would get that cold that quickly. The lowest temperature recorded in the ACAP was 4.77 degrees Celsius, or about 40.6 degrees Fahrenheit, roughly around 8 minutes into the dive. I looked it up, and that's apparently a fairly typical drop for lakes, so I guess I learned something new there. The last thing we learned was about the pod itself. During the entirety of this project, I've been worried in the back of my mind that stuffing a Raspberry Pi and a bunch of other electronics into a tiny acrylic tube was going to lead to thermal issues. I'm happy to say that the data put my fears to rest. During the entire dive, the core temperature in the pod averaged about 61.5 degrees, and it never got above 65 and a quarter. While that's still kind of high, it's under the 70-degree throttling threshold that was worrying me. So, back to our story. As you heard, I decided to find a shallower point in the lake where I'd actually be able to put an anchor down. I ended up choosing a cove inlet thing. I don't know what you call it. That was roughly due south from the original site. Alright, so this anchor sucks. Or the anchor line sucks. It took me forever to find a little inlet type place where the water is shallow enough for the anchor to actually grab. But we did find a place, and the boat is relatively stopped. So we are going to try resetting the session and deploying it again, and hopefully we can get a good ACAP from this area. After deploying the pod, something became pretty apparent. Alright. We finally got Pytheas settled in the water. All nice. Tether has slack on it. And there is some slack for the Ethernet line, although there we go. So far, water seems pretty murky, which is disappointing. But that's okay. The pressure sensor is not working accurately, and that means we're also not getting an accurate depth reading either, which is really irking me. That there's not a lot I can do about it. But at least the temperature looks more or less right. So, yeah, at this point, it's just gonna sit here and we'll see what we capture. Yeah, those sensors never came back. I saw this drift once before during testing, and from what I've read, it's just an issue that this model sensor gets sometimes. It normally clears itself up, but if the problem continues, I may end up getting it replaced. On a happier note, now that the boat was properly secured, I was able to get a full 1-hour ACAP session, and due to the shallower water, more light penetrated through, and I was able to see a little bit. Sort of. Okay. The water was still murky as hell, and I wasn't able to make out much, but at least I got a few hazy, weirdly haunting shots out of it. I mean, just look at this thing. It's probably just a branch sitting on the lake bed, but I can't not prove it's some monster from the Upside Down. I actually took one of the pictures of that thing and tried to clean it up a little, and what resulted just made it look even more alien. Alright, folks. We have pulled Pytheas out of the water after a 1-hour ACAP in this little inlet area. Looks pretty good. A lot of mud got kicked up when I was pulling it up, but that's alright. More concerning is that the sensors never really went back to normal, so I don't really have good sensor data from this run. But I do have a lot of pictures, a lot of video, and hopefully that captured something interesting. It was a little hard to see the laptop screen in the sun, but so Site 2 didn't have a huge amount of value scientifically speaking, but I still had fun with it and learned a lot overall. Moving forward, I'm going to try to fix the sensor drift issue, maybe buy a longer anchor line, and then try again, hopefully sometime in the future. For now, though, I'm pretty happy, happy enough to call Pytheas a flawed but ultimately ready platform. So I'll be moving forward and publishing its code onto GitHub, as well as some other details about the project, like block diagrams and installation instructions, things of that nature. And we will go from there. Thanks to everyone who's been watching, and hopefully I'll be able to make more posts sometime in the future.